Hi, this is Mark Russell. I am the writer behind the Flintstones and Snagglepuss comic books, and you're listening to the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast. I'm your host, Nate Goss. Today, we are excited to bring you another installment of Authors Out Loud, our author interview series. Chris Harris, author of I'm Just No Good at Rhyming and Other Nonsense for Mischievous Kids and Immature Grown-Ups, joins us on the podcast for a fantastic conversation that I will share with you shortly. But first, a little about Chris. Up until now, Chris Harris was known most for his work as a television writer who worked on shows like How I Met Your Mother and The Late Show with David Letterman. I'm Just No Good at Rhyming was published last year and is his first published book for children. The book is a collection of poetry in the same vein as Shel Silverstein, Alan Katz, and the like. In fact, Harris has been called a 21st century Shel Silverstein and even been compared to the likes of Dr. Seuss, Ogden Nash, and Edward Lear. I first discovered I'm Just No Good at Rhyming while looking at NPR's 2017 Book Concierge, where it was featured as one of the year's best kids' books. Barry Hardiman from NPR's Weekend Edition wrote this about Harris's book, quote, "It's a veritable Sunday of delights, layers of puns, word games, visual jokes that I honestly would give to any kid ages short to tall. Got a kid that loves reading and words? It's a puzzle they can giggle over. You've got a reluctant reader on your hands? The interplay of words and illustrations will capture them. Promise. You know an adult that grew up on Shel Silverstein? They'll guffaw with misty eyes." And I got to tell you, I was one of those adults, and I couldn't wait to buy the book and share it with my own family. That's why I was so eager to talk to Harris. He joined me via Skype, where he agreed to read a few of his poems and shared why he decided to write a poetry book, what it was like collaborating with Lane Smith, a titan in the world of children's publishing, and how writing for TV prepared him for this project, along with a whole lot more fun and goofiness. So why don't we jump right into my interview with Chris Harris. Chris Harris, welcome to the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast. Thanks for being here.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Nate. This is a delight for me. Thank you.
So first question I have to ask, I have my headphones on. I'm going to take them off real quick. But Schneeple.
Schnapple. I don't know if you could hear the head slap.
And for those who are listening, for those listening who aren't familiar, that's actually a piece of your author bio where it says if we ever get to meet you, that we should just go up to you. I pulled my ear for people who couldn't see, obviously, and said Schneeple, and you have a response that you always come back with.
That's right. I slap myself on the forehead and I say Schnapple, and what I wish is that I hadn't picked something that involves me hitting myself. It's fun. It's especially fun when the kids come up to me, but my forehead has some complaints.
Have you had a lot of people walk up to you and do that or take you up on that?
Yeah, it's been fun. At the readings I've gone to, and I've done a lot of talks in schools, and there are always a few kids that have already read the book, and they come up to me, and it's really fun. It's like the beginning of its own cult, I suppose.
Part of a secret club. So I want to start just broadly. This is your first children's book that you've written.
Yes.
Now, I just want to ask, why poetry? I guess
that's a great question. I started this, and when I started it was really just for my own kids. I'd been doing TV writing for close to 20 years, but when my own kids were probably about 3 and 4 years old, I had that sort of urge to, oh gosh, I want to create something for them. I noodled around with, maybe I'll do a novel or something like that, and honestly, they were not sleeping through the night. I was exhausted. I really only had the attention span for short form poetry, but also that's what they were loving at the time too.
Was this something that's been years in the process, I guess, or is this something that is still relatively newish, I guess, with your kids?
No, it's been years. I can't do the math myself. You guys can do that. But they are now 11 and 10 years old. And so this was something that we collected over the years. And some of the poems are actually just in-jokes that, my wife and I had with our kids for a while. And I turned them into writing and never guessed that I would get to share them with a bunch of other kids as well.
Well, I imagine it allowed you to kind of step back into that kid's world a little bit.
Yeah, when you have kids, there's that. I don't know. Do you have kids or?
I've got two 4-year-old boys. I got twin boys.
Oh, fantastic!
And that's why I was really thrilled to have this book, because I felt like this is a book that could be there where the sidewalk ends as they get older. And
yeah.
There are some poems that we read now, but there's other ones I kind of skip, knowing that that's something we'll get to later when they get to that age. Yeah. So that's why I wondered if it was something that happened over the years, because a lot of the poetry seems to kind of hit different targets of where kids might be in their stages of development, I guess.
Yeah, and I have to give credit to the publisher, because when I was talking and finding people to, picking a place to publish the book, there were a few places that said, yeah, we've got to target this for a certain age group, because right now it's all over the place. And the books that I remember most from growing up, they were kind of all over the place, and they were, because of that, they were the books, kind of like you said, that as I grew up, I kept coming back to them, and each time I found, oh, this used to be my favorite thing or my favorite part of it, but now I love this part of it. And that sort of richness was, I can't say it was intentional, really it was because I did write these poems over years. But I do love that Little Brown sort of got that idea of, let's make something that if we do it right, then you can read it at 4 and then read it at 6 and then read it at 10 and have a totally different experience.
Or heck, read it at 34, like me,
Exactly. And then the other thing you touched on when I originally asked about whether you have kids, because for me, being a parent and being a parent of younger kids, there was such a feeling of sort of like that feeling of like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot what it was like. And now that I'm dealing with this child, both the highs and the lows and the frustrations and everything, there were so many flashbacks and so many sort of moments of clarity. It's like, oh, right, you don't want to share your cookie, for example, with your sibling. To us adults, it just seems really silly and petty, but to a kid, it's like a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. And,
and I guess there's something about it when it's your kid, you're able to kind of relive that experience maybe more than if you just witnessed it in another kid.
No, if it's someone else's kid, then it's a brat, and why can't you control your kid? But when it's your own kid, you're like, oh my gosh, you're right. Yeah, totally. I'm with you on that. Part of it was for me trying to tell my kids in the way that I'm most comfortable with, which is words on a page instead of words from my mouth. I get it, or at least I get some of it.
I was going to see if you would mind maybe reading the title poem of your book. This is a poem called "I'm Just No Good at Rhyming." Is that something that you could read for us, please?
Absolutely. When I talk to schools, part of what I feel my mandate should be is, and what I want to do is get kids excited to read. In general, get kids excited to read my own book because I'm trying to make a living on it, but also get them excited to figure out what they can do. And because for me writing this book, I didn't really have a background in poetry. This was just something that I started to do, and it took a lot of work to get to this point. But I tell the kids that when I first started out, like you start out with most things, I wasn't necessarily very good at writing poetry. And so one of the things I did was decide, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write a poem about how I'm not very good at writing poems.
Right, what you know, right?
Exactly. And what I knew was that I didn't know. And then I always ask the kids to go along and if they can figure out what the rhyme should be before I say anything, then go ahead and shout it out. And if your listeners want to try that same thing here as I read, then they can feel free to. This is called I'm Just No Good at Rhyming. I'm just no good at rhyming. It makes me feel so bad. I'm just no good at rhyming. And that's why I'm so blue. My teacher asked if I could find a word that rhymes with hat. It's something that a dog might chase. Aha, I said, a car. My teacher asked if I could find a word that rhymes with wizard. It's something small and with a tail. Aha, I said, a puppy. My teacher asked if I could find a word that rhymes with wall. It's something you might try to catch. Aha, I said, a lizard. I'm just no good at rhyming. I'm sorry, but it's true. I'm just no good at rhyming. and that's why I'm so sad. I'm pretty good with meter and with spelling and with timing, but I'll never be a poet because I just can't rhyme words at all.
I love that. I love, first of all, just how funny it is. But the stuffy educator in me kind of appreciates your subversive approach to teaching kids how to rhyme,
Well, I think there's something to that. And I've talked before with a couple teachers about how, I remember growing up, books seemed so like these lofty tomes that were handed down to libraries from on high. They were wonderful, but being an author and having a book seemed so inconceivable in terms of how it happened. And for me, part of this, mainly because this is how I am as a person, but also as a way of sort of making it more accessible, the author of this book is just a mess, and I'm saying that both as myself and the character author in the book, but I can't figure out the right word to rhyme things with. I get into a fight with my illustrator. I have a whole list of poem titles that weren't good enough to make it into the book. So, and what I hope is that the kids sort of absorb that in some way, and they see that authors are just people. If there's a part of them that thinks, wow, if this bozo can write a book, then I bet I can do something great myself, then awesome. Then that's great.
Yeah, actually I want to kind of pick up on that a little bit, because it's like your book kind of has this prankster sensibility. I'm thinking of instances like you've got a poem, the avocado poem, which is just the word avocado over and over, but it's a way of telling kids this is how you can memorize a poem without actually having to think too hard, But you're constantly picking on your illustrator, Lane Smith, throughout the book. And then you've got these dialogues that the antics are clearly irritating another person. And it really reminded me of how I felt, at a certain age as a kid, especially this was the age, I think, for me in my generation when a show like Animaniacs came out.
Oh,
if you're familiar with that. Mm-hmm. It hit me at this perfect time in my life where it seemed like goading someone or watching someone get really irritated was the funniest thing in the world, And I thought that those moments in this book captured that so well. So I'm just wondering where that sensibility comes from. I guess, were you a troublemaker as a kid?
No, but I have those same sort of touchstone cultural and media memories that you do, just sort of from a slightly older stage. But I remember I loved those, any kind of book or movie or TV show that played with the form or sort of poked fun, not just at another character, but also the viewer. Monty Python, of course, I just adored.
I can see that, yeah.
And that was a show that wouldn't be afraid to interrupt its own skit in the middle of the skit and say, no, this is terrible, let's move on to something else. And in a way, some of that, you can see some of that in these poems. David Letterman, who I ended up working for a few years, I remember that in the 80s and him just sort of, okay, what you could feel the joy in that TV show of okay, we have an hour of television, it's late at night, nobody's paying attention. What can we do? And
it's like someone's giving you permission to misbehave almost.
Yeah. It's like, let's push the envelope a little bit. And I had a book and okay, this is really fun. I've got a book. What can I do with a book? So that's why I had a lot of fun. Okay, let's have a running joke in the acknowledgments. Let's not just have an index of poems. Let's have an outdex of the poems that didn't make it into the book. What are the different parts of a book, and what can we do to have fun with them?
I've never wanted to spend so much time poring over every single aspect of a book, I guess, until I saw this book. Because even the book jacket has a joke in it, about it being a book jacket and who this book is for. And everything's just got this fun feeling to it. How did your editors feel about that? Your publisher feel about that?
They were mostly on board. I knew that I was going to play with some things as I was writing the book, even before I submitted it to publishers. For example, the rivalry and the ongoing fight between the illustrator and me, I had the idea for that even before Lane Smith joined on. Some of the other things just sort of came about as we were putting the book together itself. Other things, like the page numbers, I think were the only thing that the publisher sort of hesitated on, because that was one that was almost like a sacred thing, it seemed. And I could feel like Andrea's eyes rolling over the phone when I was talking to her. I'm like, okay, I have this idea. I love it. And then, by the way, there are other things that they flat out rejected, which is really just as well. For a while, I was pushing, let's make this a box set. I only have one book, but it's just going to be a box set of my one book. And they're like, no, we can't make this a box set. Yeah, that's really expensive.
When you're an adult writing to kids, I imagine you have to get yourself into maybe a certain headspace. It seems like you were in every way kind of stretching what you could do with the book. Were there certain tropes or ways of talking to kids that you knew you wanted to avoid?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. I think I just found a way of talking that was most natural for me, and most of the time that's if it's an adult and a child in a conversation in this book, usually the child has the upper hand, and the adult is the rube or the mark. For better or worse, that's how it happens to be for me in real life too.
Well, I can tell you one thing I noticed, I guess, as far as whether it was intentional for you or not. But this was a book that spoke to kids in a way that never coddled them or never oversimplified ideas, you know?
Yeah.
And I really appreciated that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great answer to your own question, since I didn't have an answer to your own question, but I love it.
I'll give you an example. So you've got the one where the fourth grader is saying, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you to someone. And
yeah.
I think in today's world that could be seen as a poem that maybe you wouldn't want to publish because you wouldn't want to be realistic about that being a feeling that a kid would have. Of course, there's the added layer of that where the poem itself is spelling I love you. So it's very real about what that child's mixed feelings probably are, but the fact that you're even addressing them to me was something that I really respected.
Oh, cool. Yeah, thank you. And I think you're right that if there's a world where you put too much thought into something, you know, and this happens in television too, where you can get too concerned with, oh, this might offend this person, or this might resonate the wrong way with this other person, or I'm worried that this line makes a person unlikable, or sort of, and individually each concern is correct, but if you spend too much time thinking about it and worrying about it, then the edges can get sanded off. But even if it's a little bit harsher than you might expect from a book of fun children's poems, taken as a whole, it's okay. And don't worry about the trees, the forest is okay. You know, like it's hopefully maybe that's one of the reasons why people have responded so well to the books and the kids have enjoyed it.
Yeah. Can we hear another poem?
Absolutely. This one is called The Why Do Inside You, and when I've read it to groups of kids, usually I ask one kid to come up and be the voice of the why do that we hear later on. Here we go. The Why Do Inside You. You seem, or you think that you seem, pretty good, but sometimes you feel something under your hood. A need to be naughty, a criminal craving, a mean motivation for mass misbehaving. If you've ever felt such a whisper inside you, it could be you're hearing the voice of your why-do. The why-do inside you is a mischievous imp, as sly as a snake and as spry as a chimp, and just when you're trying to be extra nice, the why-do will offer you rotten advice. Suppose you found a magic marker sitting in the hall. The why-do whispers, "Scribble on the wall!" Or say you have a glass of milk, your mother just refilled it. The why-do whispers, "Psst, what if you spilled it?" Or say your brother's bending down to pick a four-leaf clover. The why-do whispers, "Now, go push him over!" Or say you see your sleeping sister's pigtail neath her blanket. The why-do whispers, "Hey, why don't you yank it?" Or say your class at school was told they had to settle down. The why-do whispers, "Act out like a clown!" Or say you're eating pasta with your dear old Uncle Adam. The why-do whispers, "Throw a meatball at him." You say you've a why-do inside you, my child? That urge to act out, that yen to run wild, that want to act wanton, that craven for cursin'? You fear that this makes you a terrible person? Don't worry, we all have that deep down desire for pulling down pants or for playing with fire. The why-do inside you does not mean you're awful. In fact, you could argue it makes you more lawful. For it's having bad thoughts deep down under your hood and keeping them there. Why, that's what makes us good. And that's that one. I'm not sure what that voice was. It was a little Beavis and Butthead. It was a little Frank Oz generic character. Yeah. So I'll have to work on that one.
The listeners couldn't see that you put your shirt over your head like Beavis before you did that.
Oh yeah, it was a little Gollum too. Yeah.
So how did you get paired up with Lane? For listeners who don't know who Lane Smith is, I mean, this is like cream of the crop illustrator you got here. I mean, the guy did True Story of the Three Little Pigs, Lulu and the Brontosaurus.
I got very lucky. That was all the doing of my editor, Andrea. They'd always wanted to work with him, and they'd tried a few times, and then, as Lane describes it, he got this manuscript and said great, and joined on. And I was very lucky because it took a long time for him to do all of this. I love it. Across the board, everything that he came up with was so much better and so much richer than I could have ever imagined. Lane, to me, created a whole different visual style for this book, and that's, to me, what turned it from, oh, here's something that has a few chuckles in it, to here's something that's really, really special.
I had wanted to talk a little bit about your television background. You were an executive producer on How I Met Your Mother and a writer, and you have experience working on the Late Show with David Letterman. Is there any way, or how did television writing prepare you for doing something like this?
It prepared me in a lot of ways. I mean, one thing I always talk about Letterman being great for was just learning to write, and that seems so straightforward. But what I mean is that some days you feel like writing, some days you don't. Some days you don't feel funny, some days you do. Writing is about inspiration, and writing is about what you have to say. But part of it is also a skill. Just like you need to practice at a musical instrument, you just need to keep writing in order to get better at writing. And that was such a boot camp.
I imagine it would be like a marathon on a late night show. I mean, every night you've got to have a monologue's worth of jokes,
Exactly. And it doesn't matter how you feel coming in that morning, you have to write. I think I talked a little bit already about the sense of humor that I grew up with, and working at Letterman really helped me internalize that, and working on How I Met Your Mother after that. Things like callbacks, where, we say a joke once, and then if you time it right, then when that joke comes back a second time, you get an extra laugh, and sometimes you get an even bigger laugh than the first time. And that's something we've done. That's something that's just natural in the world of television, but something that I at least hadn't seen in the world of short form poetry, especially for kids. So early in the book, some hippos destroy someone's bedroom, and then later in the book, there's this really sweet poem, and then suddenly the kid realizes that his bed's been destroyed by the hippos, and he's really angry about that. So things like that, and then poems about previous poems, and then later poems about those other poems about previous poems, and so all that sort of twisting things and tying them together, I think, were things that I learned in television. The other thing that I think was so useful, and this was more writing on shows like How I Met Your Mother than Letterman, but one of the most common things we say in the writer's room, besides "where the heck is our lunch," is write what you know, which is, it's basically a cliche at this point, but if you're writing about something that made you laugh, or made you feel frustrated, or made you feel anything, if you're starting from a point of writing about something real, then there's all that better chance that the person you're writing for, whether it's a reader or a TV viewer, will also share that emotion. Much like on How I Met Your Mother, where we would start with something that is true, or start with something that really happened, and then let's create a scene around it. A lot of these poems are things that started with a real moment, and then I let my imagination, or then I added my own spin on it.
I have to ask, because you were on Letterman, did you ever write a top 10 list?
I wrote a bunch of top 10 lists.
Did you?
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite?
Part of the application process is to write a few top 10s, and I wrote a complete one, and that ended up getting on the air. I think it was the only part of my application packet that even came close to getting on the air, but that ended up getting on the air a few months after I started, and that was it was called Top 10 Supermodels or Mideast Nations, and it was basically just a list of items that were either countries in the Mideast or supermodels, and it was like Oman, Iman, and just sort of like different names like that.
Yeah.
Top 10s were usually a collaborative process. Every writer would write a bunch of them and join in, and then they'd be selected.
How about one last poem?
Oh, sure. Here's one called Live Each Day Like It's Your Last. Live each day like it's your last, I heard my teacher cry. And so I spent the whole day screaming, I'm about to die! My mama wailed, my papa railed, my friends all wept with sorrow. Teacher's right, that sure was fun. I'll do it more tomorrow. So.
Oh, man.
That's one of my kids' favorites. I think they just like the screaming.
This was a book that you wrote, that had been brewing for a while as a parent with kids. So I guess I'm wondering, do you see more children's projects in your future, or was this kind of just a one-off thing that was very special to you?
Can I say both? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, not either or. Yeah. Bad way of phrasing the question.
Sorry. I don't want to say it wasn't special to me. It was special to me. But also, I would like to do more. And I'm probably about midway through another collection like this. So hopefully, within the next, before your kids are too old, we'll have another one. And I'm very grateful for a career in television, and wouldn't change a thing. But this is also, to use the word again, this is also really special to me. A friend told me recently, I think this is the most you thing that you've ever written. And yeah. I love that, and I think it's true. I would love to keep that going.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I would too. One last question. We throw this out to all of our authors as a way to kind of wrap things up, but we are a library, and so we just like to ask, what have you been reading lately? Anything you'd want to talk about?
Well, it's funny. As you know, now that I'm a children's book author, I haven't read a lot of children's books since I was a child myself, and so I feel like I'm playing catch-up with the last 30 years of children's literature, which is not a bad position to be in, because there's a lot of great stuff that I haven't read. I just read through the War That Saved My Life and The War I Finally Won, and then I'm going through the Philip Pullman, because I've never read any of his stuff, so I'm sort of hitting some big books right now, and really loving that. And in terms of poetry, someone recommended a couple books of concrete poetry by the name John Granditz. And It's really amazing what he does. He creates entire stories just by where he puts words on a page and what happens and how they interact. And it's really kind of inspiring and cool in terms of realizing, I've taken a few baby steps in terms of, let me shape the words this way, or let me do this, and he's really found a whole different language to use. Definitely worth a look.
Well, Chris Harris, I just want to thank you so much for being on our podcast and answering our questions and spending some time talking with us.
Oh, of course, Nate. This was such fun, and I don't get to talk about myself for this long without being interrupted at home. So this is a joy for me, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, good. Thanks again.
Thanks, Nate.
I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as you can tell I did. If you would like to try out Chris's book, I'm Just No Good at Rhyming and Other Nonsense for Mischievous Kids and Immature Grown-Ups, we have it at the library. To check it out, head on over to our website, www.cooklib.org, and search the title in our catalog. It should come right up. I have a hunch that once you take a look at it, you'll decide you need a copy for your own bookshelf. But while you're over on our website, stop by the library's blog, Shelf Life. That's where we here at Cook Library regularly post what we're reading, along with some local history stories, genealogy advice, and that's where you can also find past episodes of this podcast. Right now, you can go there and read Andrea's recommendation of Tayari Jones's An American Marriage. And our local history librarian, Jenny Berry, recently shared a wedding proposal letter from the Historical Society dated from 1880. If you want to take a look at those, along with a lot of other stuff over at Shelf Life, that blog can be found at shelflife.cooklib.org. If you enjoy this podcast, please continue to share it with others and let them know how they can subscribe in Apple Podcasts or really anywhere that they like to get their podcasts. And while I'm on the subject of Apple Podcasts, one of the best ways you could help us out is by leaving us a nice rating there. And also, we'd like to hear from you, our listeners. You can talk to us anytime. You can talk to us on Twitter. Our handle is @CookLibrary. Or you can send us an email. Send that email to webmaster@cooklib.org. We will be back soon, but until then, keep reading, keep watching, and keep listening.